What's up, Kane Sport? This is Stephen Wagner here with Matt Shodell. We are going to be breaking down the latest commit to Miami's transfer portal class. This time we're looking at Keionte Scott, redshirt senior from Auburn, kind of a versatile defensive back. Played nickel, played some corner. Really looked like he was kind of at his best in sort of a nickel role. Matt, the pickings were, kind of slim top to bottom in the transfer portal during the spring cycle. There really weren't that many dudes who I think you would fully qualify as, true free agents that are, these highly, highly coveted targets. But Keionte Scott comes from Auburn, was an all-SEC talent, very good punt returner too, played for Zach Etheridge for 2 years with the Tigers. They're reuniting. Do you think Zach Etheridge can bring Keionte Scott back to the player that he was in 2022 and 23?
Well, there's a little to unpack here. Sort of, big picture, this speaks a lot to Miami missing on Charles Brantley, who was really good at Michigan State and then just showed up here and was slow and looked, just not real strong, which was bizarre, considering he had a really good year at Michigan State. I think the injury he had at the end of the year really hampered him. So it looks like that's out the window, right? Because he plays nickel also, and I think they're bringing. I assume that they're signing Keionte to start. I mean, he's a starting caliber nickel for sure, and it also speaks to Damari Brown, right? Damari Brown's injury history. It seems like they just aren't really sold on either of those guys getting it done, because honestly, Miami needed a premier safety and a premier defensive tackle more than I would have thought they needed a nickel. But they obviously felt they needed a nickel. And obviously, Zach Etheridge had a lot to do with this because he knows this guy as well as anybody. So if you think Zach Etheridge is a good coach and you trust him, then this is a great pickup. And I think he's a very good coach. So I'm very happy with this pickup. They certainly need as many really, really good players as they can at every cornerback spot, outside boundary and nickel, when you saw what happened last year to the secondary. So this is a great pickup. There's no reason not to add him with a 105 roster limit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, with that said, there are some numbers that I'll give you guys, because last year he did play boundary corner and he was not good, but he was excellent at nickel the prior 2 years. So Pro Football Focus, obviously their grades are very subjective, but when they do targeted cornerbacks, targeted nickels, right, when it's a one-on-one situation, they chart how many times that player was targeted in games and how many completions for how many yards there were against that players. And the best players obviously have pretty good numbers in that department. So last year, again, playing boundary, right, he allowed 16 catches on 22 targets, 67% completion, not real good, for 317 yards and 2 touchdowns. Really pretty bad. Okay. The prior year, in 2023, he was targeted 34 times. So he played 469 reps and was only targeted 34 times. That's not a lot. That means he's doing a pretty good job, and other teams are not really saying, hey, here's a weakness we can exploit, right? So they weren't really targeting him. He only allowed 18 catches the whole year on 34 targets for 258 yards and a touchdown. That's fantastic. And that was his first year at Auburn, coming out as a top-rated junior college prospect, like one of the top junior college guys in the country. The next year, you saw him slide a little bit. In 629 reps, he was targeted 54 times and allowed 38 catches. Okay, not real good. 422 yards and a touchdown. So what's weird to me is his first year at Auburn, he was outstanding. His second year, he wasn't quite as good. And his third year, he was just bad. So, that's not the trend you want. But with that said, he still was really good those first 2 years in general. Probably better than anything Miami had definitely better than anything Miami had last year, and probably better than anything Miami has this year. So you take him, Is he going to be an All-American, a first-team All-ACC guy, or even a second-team All-ACC guy? I'm not going to sit here and say that. It's like Bert Auburn, very similar to Bert Auburn, right? Bert Auburn, the kicker, had a fantastic first 2 years at Texas and then a terrible year, right? Now the question is, will he be fantastic again? I don't know. Is he a head case? I don't know. Is there something else going on with Keionte? Because it's one thing, like, to me, and I have not played football at an extremely high level. I played a lot of football at a very low level. Okay. I was a baseball player. I'm sorry. But to me, if you're an athletic cornerback and you're an athletic nickel, I think nickel's harder to play than boundary corner to some extent, especially when you're, what is he, 6 foot, 6'1", right?
He's 6 foot, 192 pounds on Auburn's website.
Yeah. So 6 foot. So he has enough size to play boundary corner, which is why Auburn put him there, right? And if you're quick twitch enough to play nickel against those little speedy fast guys, you certainly should be quick enough to hang with the outside receivers. So, I don't know what went wrong. I want to talk to Keionte and have him explain it, but he is ignoring me, like most people do in my life. He's not responding to me whenever I ask him to talk to me. So I don't have an answer for anybody. But that's concerning because I don't see the disconnect between why he'd be so good at nickel and so bad at corner the next year. Like, to me, you should still be pretty good. If you're that good an athlete, you can play at nickel and you're that big, you're not a tiny nickel guy. You're not one of these like Trajan Bandy guys for Miami fans, right? Stephen, you weren't there, but when Trajan Bandy played here, I think he was 5'9", 170, 180 pounds, and he was a pretty good nickel. But he couldn't play boundary. This guy's big enough to play boundary. So, again, some unanswered questions. I have a feeling you're going to say how great he is, so go ahead. Let's hear it. Let's hear how amazing this guy is.
So I looked at his tape. His first 2 years, you were right. He's a playmaker. He's noticeable. Everyone, sees Keionte Scott and you go, that guy's a really, really solid player. He was all SEC. Then this last year, it felt like, whenever I was watching his stuff, there were a lot of lowlights. And, you kind of think typically, if someone's going to be playing out of position, they'll be a little bit more uncomfortable. But because nickel is such a complex position that requires you to do so much, you almost thought it would have been a little bit easier making the move to corner. Maybe I don't know enough about football. That's absolutely possible. But you didn't just see him struggle in coverage last year. I mean, you also see, a bunch of clips of him, missing tackles and, just getting absolutely, blocked right down the field on these run plays. It did look like, he had, like some ankle issues that he was working through. I don't know the extent of those injuries. So, for all we know, maybe there was something that, was kind of holding him back in that regard. But to me, it just felt like there was something off entirely because, it'd be one thing if, he's getting picked on one-on-one on an island and it's clear, he never should have been put at corner. Let's move him back to nickel. But he's also, just, missing, very easy tackles in the run game. He's allowing, receivers who in some cases were his size to, just mow him over and push him down the field. And that's coming off of, his first 2 years where, you see him playing fast and loose. He's aggressive at the nickel position. He really loves, the opportunity to kind of, attack the line of scrimmage, get really involved in the run game. Really liked blitzing a lot, was pretty good as a blitzer. And obviously, had the speed to cover slot receivers. But anytime that he was in man coverage, he really wasn't great. And I will say, I found that trend pretty consistent, even going back to his first 2 years when he was at nickel. Whenever they would ask you one-on-one, lock this guy up, not fantastic. But, whenever he was in zone, I mean, he's veteran enough. He understands his zone responsibilities. Whenever they would let him, just attack the line of scrimmage, he really, embraced that as well as he could. Do I think that, he can return to the form he was in his first 2 years? I really do, because, sometimes like I said, with Bert Auburn, sometimes you can benefit from a change of scenery. Sometimes you kind of do feel like you need a fresh start. Sometimes things, grow a little bit stale in the environment that you were previously in. He's coming back to reunite with his secondary coach that did absolutely get the best version of him at Auburn. If he stays healthy and there's not any off the field stuff, because, like you said, Matt, for all we know, he's a head case. There's all kinds of stuff going on off the field, and that's what's keeping him from playing at the level that he was at his first 2 years. I have no idea. But all of the circumstances are absolutely there for him to succeed in Miami. To what extent, I think, is kind of the question that we're all waiting to find out.
And I'll just add real quick, Miami now has taken 18 transfers, and I'm projecting 10 to 12 of them will be starters for game one, which is crazy. When if I took my time machine back 3.5 years to when Mario took the job at Miami, I would have said 3.5 years from now, this will be Mario's roster, which it is, by the way. The only player who's not Mario's hand-picked player, whether in the portal or recruiting, is Ryan Rodriguez on the entire roster. That's it. So I would have said this is going to be a 5-star, 4-star dominated lineup of guys who will be juniors, redshirt sophomores, and then a few free agents, But instead, he's taken 18 transfers. To me right now, there's probably 4 fairly clear free agents: Beck, Brockermeyer, Lucas, and Poyser, just from what I've seen, because I wouldn't have called Lucas a free agent until I saw him, obviously because he was a backup last year. But the other 3 I would have called free agents. And Keonte, I can't call him a free agent. Yeah, he was really good at Auburn, but after last year, it's like calling Bert Auburn a free agent. Like, when you struggle that much that you get benched, and your numbers are that bad, you can't just call that guy a free agent. He has to prove himself all over again. So that's really going to be the challenge for Keonte and for this whole Miami team, because they need to mesh together. And I talked with the really ugly guy who usually sits in your place in the mornings. I talked to him about it, saying that this is now a totally revamped team that has to be a team. The problem a lot of times with transfer portal guys and in general is it's not just that they're mercenaries who are looking for money and 1-year fixes or whatever it is. It's that when they don't get the job, when they are beat out in the competition, what happens to your culture? What happens to these cancers in the locker room that we all know affects entire teams really horribly? Every coach will tell you that. A few bad players, a few bad attitudes will mess up your whole damn team. And you have to find a way around that. And when Mario takes all these transfers, you could see it work great, like with FSU 2 years ago, and you could see it work terrible, like with FSU last year. FSU's been going crazy in the portal. They take 20-plus transfer portal guys a year. This is the most portal guys Mario's ever taken. Okay, 18. It's the most he's ever taken. And this should be a year in which he's relying on the 5-stars and 4-stars and the talent that he's recruited and developed. So I'm really curious to see if those guys actually beat out these transfer guys, and then what happens with the attitudes of the team if that does happen, because that's what should happen. Because if you only have 4 free agents out of 18 guys and your goal is to make the playoffs, right? And unless I'm wrong with my free agent counts, and maybe I am, maybe some of these other guys will be great, but if they're not, then where does this end up? Where does this go? And it's going to be a really interesting fall camp. It's going to be a really interesting season, because I think what Mario's doing is bringing in a lot of competition, but not a lot of the guy we just brought ends up here and everyone else is down here, and now they have to raise their level of competition to meet him. I think a lot of it is right in this little gap here, not elite, but pretty good, and then some just good, and the good has to get very good. But are they going to get to that elite level altogether to be a playoff team? That's the big question everyone wants answered. So it's going to be a fun ride. Or well, not, Matt, not a fun ride. We don't know yet.
Well, Matt, I thought this was going to take 3 minutes. It took 13. Yeah, but nonetheless, Miami has a new transfer, nickelback, Keionte Scott. We'll see if he can return to his previous form. For Matt Shodell, I'm Stephen Wagner. We'll see you next time, everybody.